Most people who know at least a little about the assassination of President John Kennedy in Dallas know that Lee Oswald worked in the Texas School Book Depository in Dealey Plaza, the building and the area where the shots rang out. What some may not be aware of is that within minutes of the shots and the presidential motorcade speeding off toward Parkland Hospital, Oswald left the book depository and made his way to the Texas Theater to meet a contact, by bus and by taxi, just under 3 miles away. Why? And who was he meeting? We'll explore that in a minute. But first, consider. Suppose Lee Oswald really had been a lone nut shooter on the 6th floor of the book depository. What would he have done next after he shot the president? He certainly would not have gone to the Texas Theater. He certainly wouldn't have been wandering aimlessly on the streets in Oak Cliff, as the Warren Commission would have us believe. He certainly would not have had to go back to his rooming house to get a pistol. He would have just taken it to work with him. According to the official story, no one knew who he was at the time. He would have taken the first bus or taxi out of town and then headed for Mexico and the open border that was only about 400 miles away. Remember, the Warren Commission wants you to believe that he was trying to get into Cuba anyway, less than 1 month before. The last thing Oswald would have done is stick around Dallas. But Oswald wasn't in the 6th floor window. He was in the 2nd floor lunchroom, where he was seen by building employee Carolyn Arnold at 12:25 p.m., 5 minutes before the shooting, and then by Dallas officer Marion Baker and building manager Roy Truly, approximately 3 to 4 minutes after the shooting, in exactly the same lunchroom location. So why would Lee Oswald feel the need to get to the Texas Theater as quickly as he did? And who did he plan to meet there? We know that when he arrived at the theater, he was clearly looking to meet a contact. Oswald purchased a ticket, and yes, I said purchased a ticket. Like many researchers, I believe he did not sneak into the theater. Then Oswald entered and walked to the lower level and sat first next to 18-year-old Jack Davis. Then he moved to sit next to at least 3 other people before finally moving next to a pregnant woman. Oswald sat next to this woman for a few minutes, and then both he and the woman got up from their seats. According to Butch Burroughs, an employee who sold Oswald popcorn, the pregnant woman went to a restroom, disappeared, and was never seen again. Was this pregnant woman his contact? Who knows? But taking into consideration that the movie playing was War is Hell, I think most people would agree that that movie is not a place you would expect to find a woman close to giving birth at 1:15 p.m. on a Friday afternoon. Whether it was the pregnant woman or someone else, Oswald was looking for his contact. Although Dallas authorities will try to hush it up as much as possible, in Oswald's wallet was the half of $2 bills. The half-dollar bills were described in detail on a Dallas police inventory report. As reported in his excellent book, Harvey and Lee, author John Armstrong will point out that the CIA's David Atlee Phillips wrote in his 1977 autobiography about using similar techniques. Phillips wrote that when he would meet a contact at a movie theater whom he didn't know, he carried with him a previously arranged item and recognized a prearranged coded phrase. Remember, there were 2 Lee Oswalds arrested that day at the Texas Theater. After Oswald was arrested on the 1st floor and brought out the front door of the theater, a second Oswald look-alike was arrested in the balcony, handcuffed, and brought out the back door of the theater, never to be heard from again. So who did the contact represent? What were they talking about? I believe Lee Oswald went to the Texas Theater to meet an FBI agent. I firmly believe Oswald had saved the president's life 3 weeks earlier in Chicago, and I think he had been working to do the same in Dallas. But there would be no real FBI agent to meet in that theater, because Oswald had been set up. If he had managed to make it alive to that theater, I think the plan was to end his life there if possible. When that was not possible, Oswald would be gunned down 2 days later in the basement of the Dallas City Jail. In order to present proof Lee Oswald believed he was meeting an FBI contact in the Texas theater, we have to briefly look at his history over the few years prior. After joining the Marines a week after his 17th birthday, Oswald earned a top-secret security clearance and was trained in aviation surveillance and radar operations, and stationed at Yacucci, Japan, the base from which the top-secret U-2 spy flights originated. Oswald also learned Russian while in the Marines. Next, under CIA cover, he would participate in an unsuccessful fake defector program to Russia. After repatriation, Lee Oswald remained under CIA employ and was sent to New Orleans. He worked at Jaeger, Childs, and Stovall, a position requiring security clearance since they manufactured highly classified maps for the U.S. Army. Oswald could never have been employed there if he was a true defector. Oswald was assigned to work with Guy Bannister and to support anti-Castro Cuban paramilitary groups operating at Lake Pontchartrain. He also became a paid informant for the FBI at this time. Bannister was a former FBI station chief in the Chicago office and deputy superintendent of the New Orleans Police Department. Oswald had an office in Bannister's building and assisted Bannister visiting college campuses, recruiting for intelligence agencies, and keeping tabs on leftist organizations. What many don't know is Oswald's increasing association with the most violent of the anti-Castro Cuban groups that summer of 1963. The House Select Committee on Assassinations nailed it exactly. The most violent of the anti-Castro Cubans were under the direct control of the CIA from their Miami headquarters. Oswald realized how militant these groups were, and by all accounts, became aware of plots to assassinate Kennedy as payback for the Bay of Pigs. Lee Oswald was being squeezed on two sides. He was doing his patriotic duty and helping anti-Castro Cuban groups in paramilitary training, but by infiltrating the most violent of these anti-Castro Cubans, he also learned of assassination planning. That's a lot to deal with for a 24-year-old. Oswald was a paid FBI informant, so he did have an outlet for his information, and probably received instruction from the FBI to continue his undercover work to infiltrate legitimate assassination attempts. All this while still supporting anti-Castro groups in their overall mission. It is more than probable that Oswald saved John Kennedy's life in Chicago 3 weeks before Dallas. Hoover reported a tip from an informant named Lee about a four-man hit team of dark-complected men who would shoot the president with high-powered rifles from an office building overlooking the president's motorcade route on his way from O'Hare Airport to Soldier Field. 2 of the men were taken into custody, but with 2 possible assassins still operating, the president's trip was called off at the very last minute, even after the press plane had already left.
The setup with a disaffected Marine patsy in a warehouse on an elevated floor above a presidential motorcade traveling at a slow pace below, with snipers hidden about the scene with telescopic rifles, and the patsy having gun and ammo in his possession. This is all almost eerily similar to what's going to happen in Dallas.
There are other reasons to believe that Oswald was an active informant for the FBI in Dallas, including an incident just 4 days before the JFK assassination. Donnell Whitaker was a garage mechanic who worked on Jack Ruby's car. On November 18, 1963, Whitaker was arrested with Lawrence Miller in possession of U.S. Army weapons that were stolen from the National Guard Armory in Terrell, Texas. The burglary of the National Guard Armory revealed connections between Ruby, Lee Oswald, and John Thomas Mason, among others. And we know that Jack Ruby was a gun runner to Cuba for years, first in support of Castro and then in opposition to him, as per the wishes of his organized crime overseers. Was Lee Harvey Oswald the FBI informant who turned in Whitaker and Miller? I believe he was. In addition, many people are already familiar with FBI agent James Hosty and his visits to see Oswald. Hosty and his supervisor, Gordon Shanklin, illegally destroyed a letter that Lee Oswald had delivered to the Dallas FBI office just hours after he was killed by Jack Ruby.
November 24th, it was at least 2 hours after the announced death of Lee Oswald. It could have been 3 or 4 hours afterwards. It was sometime that afternoon of November 24th. Mr. Howe told me that Mr. Shanklin wanted to see me and Mr. Howe in his office.
What transpired it then?
Mr. Shanklin reached down into the lower right-hand drawer of his desk. It's a large double drawer in which he has numerous manila folders where they keep various notes. There's a folder for each agent, and they keep various notations and routing slips, error forms, and things like that in these folders. He reached down and took out the memorandum and the note in question, and he handed it to me, and he said, in effect, Oswald's dead now, there can be no trial. Here, get rid of this. I then proceeded to tear it up. In his presence, he said, no, get it out of here. I don't even want it in this office. Get rid of it. I then took it out and destroyed it.
And how did you destroy it?
I took it into the washroom and flushed it down the drain.
Did you testify before the Warren Commission?
I did.
Did you volunteer or give any information about the note or its destruction?
I did not.
Why not?
I wasn't asked.
Did you give any information or volunteer any information with respect to your instructions regarding Commission Exhibit 103?
No, sir.
Why not?
I wasn't asked.
And did you think about volunteering the information?
No, sir.
Why not?
I was instructed when I went up there that I was to only answer the questions that were set to me, and I was not to expand on anything and not to elaborate, to only answer the questions that were put to me.
And who gave you those instructions?
Given to me by at least 2 officials in Dallas and at least one in FBI headquarters. They were given to me by Mr. Shanklin, Mr. Gimberling, who was a supervisor who succeeded Mr. Howe, and also by former Assistant Director Alan Belmont.
If that letter from Oswald contained anything that would have incriminated him, it would have been released immediately. But the letter was destroyed, and the true relationship of Lee Oswald's work for the FBI has been covered up for 60 years. So yes, I think Lee Oswald did save the president's life in Chicago by revealing the assassination plot there, and I believe he did everything he could to reveal an assassination plot he knew was formulated for Dallas. But he did not know when he went to the Texas theater that he had been singled out as the patsy and would be murdered himself. Quite possibly because he knew so much by this time about how out of control factions of U.S. intelligence and the anti-Castro paramilitary groups actually were. I believe Lee Oswald did his duty to his country and his conscience right up to the time of his murder in the basement of the Dallas City Jail.